Alright, hello, good day everyone. Sir Howard here. Welcome sa isa nating lecture ngayon. And for today, we are going to have a lecture about what is positive psychology. Usually, these kinds of lectures are being given to students who will enter the class for the first time, especially students who will be taking positive psychology. So if you are one of those students na gusto mong malaman ano yung positive psychology, you want to be introduced to the field, this is a good lecture to watch. But before I introduce to you positive psychology, please do this exercise. You can pause the video if you like. I want you to recall a problem in your life that you overcame which you think made you a better person. Isang problema sa buhay mo na naranasan mo dati na nalampasan mo at the same time nagpatatag sa'yo. Mas naging better ka bilang tao because of that problem. So again, pause this video to do this exercise. Later on, as we end the video, as we end this lecture, we will make sense why did I ask you to do this. Now, let's go straight to a typical course description on what positive psychology is. You go to Google Scholar, hanap ka ng mga syllabus that talks about positive psychology. More or less, you will be reading this kind of description about the field. Now, take note, yung nakikita nyo ngayon on the screen is the course description coming from the La Salle University. But different universities will have different contents in their course description of positive psychology, but I believe marami namang mga overlaps dyan. Marami namang pagkakapare-pareho yan. So let's just stick with this one. This course will introduce students to the emerging field of positive psychology, which is, I want you to highlight these words, the science of happiness and human strengths. For the past several years, psychology was devoted mainly on studying mental illness and how to treat patients. The positive psychology movement asserts that psychology is also dedicated to promoting human strengths and virtues, and that its goal is not merely to treat but also prevent illness. Those are very important details about the field. As we go along, i-discuss ko isa-isa yan. The course will evaluate empirical studies on happiness and other positive concepts, and students will learn primarily from classroom discussions. Okay, so more or less, by reading that description, meron ka ng idea what positive psychology is. But you know, it's better to define the field using the definition given by the APA, the American Psychological Association, kasi sila yung pinakamalaking organization in psychology, right? So this has to be legit. If they define something, more or less, this is the official definition of that concept. Let's read. This is coming from their website, no? What is positive psychology? A field of psychological theory, i-move ko lang ng konti, and research that focuses on the psychological states such as contentment or joy, individual traits or character strengths such as intimacy, integrity, altruism, wisdom, and social institutions that enhance subjective well-being and make life most worth living. So marami namang siyang marami naman siyang overlap, no, between this definition and the content of the syllabus. Marami naman pagkakapare-pareho. But if I am going to summarize what this subject is all about, positive psychology, the main goal of this specialization in psychology is, altogether read with me, how to achieve happiness. If you are so interested about happiness, you want to understand how happiness works, you want to learn what makes people happy, what can make you happy in the scientific perspective, you need to study positive psychology. One more thing, this is very important. The more scientific term for happiness is subjective well-being. Okay, so whenever you hear the word subjective well-being in this field, pareho lang yan sa happiness. Kasi yung term na happiness, pang layman's terms, very popular, but if you will be scientific about happiness, parang scientific name niya yan. What's the scientific name of happiness? Answer, subjective well-being. Alright? So, let me continue by giving you the main reasons why psychology emerged in the first place. Bakit ba yung mga tao gumawa ng field of knowledge called psychology? In our history, meron talaga tayong purpose why we want a field called psychology. There are 3 missions. In the first place, why we founded psychology, number 1, it's to cure mental illness. Number 2, it's to make life more fulfilling. And number 3, because we want to nurture human talents and make it better. Yan yung 3 reason. Bakit tayo nagsa-psychology? In history, ito yung pinaka-reasons. Bakit natin sinimulan itong psychology na ito? But as time went by, for some reason, which I'm going to explain later, among the 3, ang pinaka-na-highlight is number 1. Right? I mean, that's the common understanding of someone when he or she hears psychology. What is psychology? Tungkol sa mental illness yan. Clinical psychology yan. Pinag-aaralan dyan yung mga psychological disorders. Right? But we have to understand, no? Why is it that among these 3, number 1 is the most emphasized or highlighted? May mga key events yan in our history that may explain that. Number 1, because when you look at our founding fathers, strangely, they are so interested about mental illness. Not so much on numbers 2 and 3. Good example, Sigmund Freud. Look at Freud, one of the founding fathers of modern psychology. Every time Freud writes something, every time Freud teaches the public something, it's about mental illness. Kaya nga may sinulat siyang mga libro, di ba? It's all about mental illness. What's wrong with the mind? Psychopathology of everyday life, studies on hysteria, even his theory, yung psychodynamic theory, if you remember your theories of personality, ang daming mga implications ng theory niya. The psychodynamic theory basically is used to understand abnormal behaviors. Id, ego, superego, subconscious, conscious, the unconscious, defense mechanisms, all these are taught by Freud to give light, to teach the public how abnormal behaviors work. Kaya yung theory ni Freud, talaga yan para sa mental illness, not so much on the positive side of the mind. That's why, within our field of knowledge, when we talk about different majors in psychology, ang pinakamatandang mga subjects would be these 2, abnormal psychology and clinical psychology. That's where we started. Nauna talaga yung mga yan. Before human development psychology, before statistics. Yes, believe it or not, statistics, psychological ang origin yan, specifically behavioral statistics. Before all these things, psychology started its footing here. Abpsych and clinical psych. Mga matatanda na yan. Okay, so that's one of the reasons bakit na-highlight yung number 1, because of our founding fathers. And remember, after si Sigmund Freud, maraming disciples who idolized him. Therefore, because they idolized Freud, they also wanted to do the same, focusing on mental illness. Kaya yung Psychoanalytic Society, maraming members yon, sila Carl Jung, sila Alfred Adler. Most of them talk about what's wrong with the mind. Okay? Another event that can explain why number 1 is highlighted more than numbers 2 and 3, the end of World War. Psychology became very useful, especially nung natapos na yung gera, yung World War II. Why? Use your common sense, because having a world war is a very unpleasant historical event that resulted to a lot of psychological problems. Siyempre, marami mga tao na damage yung mind because of the war. May mga PTSD, nagkaroon ng depression, kung ano-ano pang mga psychological illnesses. Who is there to save the day? Well, psychologists who study mental illness. Kaya sobrang busy ng mga psychologists during those times when different countries were recovering from the war. Other than economic and financial recovery, A lot of these countries were also recovering psychologically, and so psychologists used their knowledge of mental illness to help recovering people. Kaya lalong na-highlight yung number 1, di ba? During those times, wala masyadong tao na fulfilling yung life. Wala masyadong tao yung pinoproblema yung talent niya. Ang pinoproblema nila, paano mag-move on from that traumatic event. And last one, number 3, in connection to number 2, nung medyo naka-recover na yung mundo from the war, nagbukas na ulit yung mga schools and universities really pushed the research, different researches on mental illness. So, nung nagbukas na yung mga big-time schools, sabi nila, if you want to get budget for your research, your topic has to be about mental illness. Kasi kahit naka-recover na yung maraming tao from the war, yung karamihan dyan, long-term effects yan eh. Diba? It's not yet done. We still need to understand better mental illness so that in the future, something bad happens again. Like a war or maybe a pandemic, we would know what to do. So mag-research pa kayo ng mag-research on mental illness. So again, nakakontribute na naman yan why number 1 was highlighted more than numbers 2 and 3. So that was the state of psychology for decades, focused on mental illness. But someone in the field of psychology changed the direction of the field. And this is a big name in positive psychology. You have to remember the name Martin Seligman. Letter M there is Martin, Martin Seligman. He started a movement in the field. Alam nyo, pag sinabi mong movement in the field, it means a shift of emphasis. May malaking pagbabago na nangyari in the field of psychology. That's what you mean by movement. And what is that emphasis that Seligman started in the field of psychology? Well, listen to the words he said in one of his speeches. Sabi niya, 50 years later, I want to remind our field that it has been sidetracked. Sa Tagalog, mukhang may nalimutan tayo. Meron tayong inetsapuera. Psychology is not just the study of weakness and damage, it is also the study of strength and virtue. Treatment is not just fixing what is broken, it is nurturing what is best within ourselves. So yan talaga yung gusto na i-emphasize ni Martin Seligman. Let's now talk about the positive side of the human mind. It's time to have a paradigm shift from human weakness, which we have been talking a lot about for the past 50 years. Why don't we focus ourselves to human strength? From studying intervention, fixing people, fixing what's wrong with the mind, why don't we study how can a person prevent being broken in the first place? Bakit pa natin aantayin na gawin yung sira? Bakit hindi natin pag-aralan paano hindi masira yung ating psychological system? Diba? Very different from the usual ways of traditional psychology. So, given that new movement by Seligman, nagkaroon na ngayon tayo ng parang dalawang approach or dalawang ways on how to study the mind. In one side, how can we fix what's wrong? Clinical psychology model yan. Abnormal psychology model yan. So pag-aaralan natin dyan, kolektahin natin yung mga depressed. And then let's give them a certain treatment. And then let's evaluate through statistics how did this treatment help them. Clinical psychology approach yon. But what Martin Seligman wants is the opposite. How can we prevent the psyche from being wrong? Hanap ngayon tayo ng mga taong hindi depressed. People who are happy. And question, what makes them happy? Why are they not depressed? maybe these are the factors, psychological factors that if we have, pag meron tayo, less likely tayong madidepress. Now, we teach people how to have those factors that will shield you from depression. Diba? Ibang-iba yung model, no? Let me repeat, iba yung abnormal psychology / clinical psychology model, ganito yon. Diba? May negative event na nangyari, nagkasakit siya psychologically, pag-aralan natin paano gamutin, how to fix the person. But in positive psychology model, it's different. These are the people with healthy psyche. It seems like they are not that affected by negative emotions. They have something that shields them from the effect of these negative emotions. Ano kaya yun? Yun ang ituro natin sa tao. Two very different approaches. Kaya nga, we can connect that now to the exercise I ask you to do. Recall a problem in your life that you overcame which you think made you a better person. This exercise is coming from the paradigm of positive psychology. Ganyan talaga pinapagawa ng mga positive psychologists sa mga tao. Focus tayo doon sa maganda. Given that problem, paano mo siya nalagpasan? Ano yung mga ginawa mo? Ano yung mga inisip mo? Bakit mo siya nalampasan? Diba? Yung mga kakausapin mo dyan are people who are not depressed. You talk to here people who are strong, or in the more scientific term, resilient people. Yun yung mga kakausapin mo. Contrast to clinical psychology / abnormal psychology model. Paano mo iibahin yan? If this is positive psychology, this is clinical psychology. Recall a problem in your life that really brought you down. Describe how down you were during these times. Ibang-iba yung emphasis. Ikwento mo sa akin kailan ka na down. Ikwento mo sa akin gaano ka down. Ano yung mga naramdaman mo nung sobrang down na down ka? Tell me more about it. What did you do? How did you treat yourself while you were broken like this? And maybe we can teach this to other people. Two different approaches. And so, when Martin Seligman became president of the APA, 1998, that was his flagship project. As the president of the APA, he wanted psychologists, professional psychologists, to do more positive psychology research. Tama na muna yung tungkol sa psychopathology. Marami na tayong alam dyan. In simple Tagalog, gas-gas na yan. Nag-uumapaw na yung mga journal articles dyan. Why don't we begin filling up? Why don't we begin constructing, designing studies that aim to talk about positive psychological things? We research about hope, love, peace, wisdom, courage, spirituality, happiness. Yan talaga yung pinush niya nung naging presidente siya ng APA. And by the way, one of the major achievements of Seligman when he became president, nagkaroon ngayon ng counterpart yung DSM, or opposite book yung DSM. DSM is all about mental illness. For decades, ito yung ginagamit ng mga psychologists to study, to focus on mental illness. Sabi ni Seligman, dapat may counterpart yan. Balansehin natin yung field. Why don't we create a handbook of character, strengths, and virtues? Diba? As you can see here, i-zoom natin As you can see here, isa siya sa authors niyan. Sila ni Christopher Peterson. Right? So this one, you read if you want to understand abnormal behaviors. This one, you read if you want to understand how the psyche becomes stronger. Alright? So again, going back, when you take positive psychology as a subject in any college, okay, ano ba yung mga usual topics dyan? Given the philosophy, given the emphasis of positive psychology as a field, most likely you are going to talk about the following topics: character strengths, pleasure, self-efficacy, self-esteem, optimism, gratitude, love, motivation, empathy, forgiveness, growth mindset, self-actualization, mental health, spirituality, at marami pa akong hindi sinabi dyan. But again, this is what most positive psychology textbooks and research would be concerned about. And the good news is, in this series of lectures that we are going to do about positive psychology, lahat yan dadaanan natin. Yes, all of these things we will talk about. Alright? So before we end this lecture, let me just give you some closing notes about positive psychology. Okay? That will help you better understand and have the correct perspective in studying positive psychology. Number one, positive psychology is not denying the negative. Hindi natin sinasabi na huwag na tayo mag-aral ng clinical psychology o ng abnormal psychology. Kasama pa rin yan sa flowchart ng isang psych major. Positive psychologists are not saying that abnormal behaviors don't exist. Just the opposite. They acknowledge the existence of the negative, the existence of psychopathology. Ang sinasabi lang ng mga positive psychologists, masyado ng focus, masyado ng bias sa negative. Let's balance the field. Let's now focus. Let's give our efforts to study the positive. But we are not denying the negative. In fact, I would even say, positive psychology is complementary to clinical or abnormal psychology. Hindi rin naman mabubuo yung positive psychology kung hindi dahil sa traditional clinical/abnormal psychology. You know why? Because by studying the negative, we will better understand the positive. Don't you agree? Totoo naman yan eh. Complementary yan. So, hindi natin pinagsasabong, hindi natin pinaglalaban yung, clinical psychology versus positive psychology. Which field are you in? No. These are two fields within the field of psychology. They complement each other. If you want to better understand what makes the mind go well, you need to have a solid knowledge what makes the mind go wrong. Let me demonstrate. Halimbawa, na-master mo na yung depression. Now you understand the factors that make people depressed. A, B, and C. Marami ka sigurong alam dyan na factors. 3 factors that make a person depressed. So what? We can use that. Okay, now that I know these 3 makes a person depressed, now we can use that for positive psychology. Okay, so given letters A, B, and C, whatever that is, what can we do to prevent these factors from happening? Anong pwede natin gawin para hindi mangyari? Para hindi magkaroon ng letters A, B, and C yung tao? Number 2, what can we do to prepare a person for this? Habang wala pang A, B, and C, kung ano man yan, ano yung mga pwedeng gawin ng tao? Para kapag dumating man yung A, B, and C, this person knows what to do. That person knows how to handle letters A, B, and C. Yun ngayon yung positive psychology. You see the complementarity of the two fields. By studying the negative, we learn insights about the positive. So, hindi dapat pinaglalaban, no? Ang negative versus positive psychology. Number 2, I want to remind everyone listening that positive psychology is a scientific field. Please lang, science pa rin ito. Okay? I think at this point, if you are a student of psychology, you understand what does it mean when you say psychology is a science. It means everything we say about the mind is based on data. Strong data. We don't believe a theory, we don't believe a psychological claim without data that we collected, that we analyzed using the scientific method. And that's exactly the approach of positive psychology. Lahat ng sinasabi natin sa positive psychology about what makes the mind okay, what makes people happy, scientific, may data na pinanggagalingan. Now, why am I emphasizing this? I want to warn you against popular psychology or pop psych for short. Don't confuse positive psychology with popular psychology. Ano ba yung popular psychology? Again, APA definition, let me resize, PopPsych, psychological knowledge as understood by members of the general public, mga laymans, which may be oversimplified, misinterpreted, ibig sabihin, madalas maling paniniwala, and out of date, luma na. Alright? Also known as common sense psychology or folk psychology. Number 2, psychological information intended specifically for use by the general public, such as self-help books and television and radio advice programs. So, karamihan ng mga psychological ideas that you hear from these sources, self-help books in bookstores, DJs in the radio, media people in television or social media, oh my goodness, a lot of the things they say about the mind will fall under popular psychology, which is, again, ulitin ko lang, karamihan sa mga yan, oversimplified, misinterpreted, and out of date. So don't think that those things are positive psychology. Hindi porket nakarinig ka ng isang statement about the mind na maganda, ay, positive psychology yun. No. You have to differentiate what's popular psychology from what's positive psychology. And one way to differentiate is you always look for the data. Dapat yun yung tatanong mo. You hear someone making a claim, oh, you know what? The mind gets better. People become happier when you do this and you do that. How do you know if that's popular psychology or positive psychology? Ask the person, where's the data to support that? Yan ang problema sa mga self-help books. Maybe marami dito mahilig makinig o mahilig magbasa ng mga self-help books na yan. I warn you, especially if you are a psych major, you need to be better than this. Gets? You should not be swayed away by the claims of these popular psychologists and think that you are absorbing positive psychology knowledge. Ano sinabi ng APA? Karamihan ng mga claims coming from these self-help books are oversimplified, misinterpreted, and out of date. Which is dangerous, by the way. When you apply wrong principles about the mind, you destroy a person's life. You destroy your own life. And this is what some of the books are doing. Kaya careful. Careful. Please, be extra careful. Popular psychology is not the same as positive psychology. We always go back to the data, we look at the methodology, how a claim was made in the first place. Before I end this video, let me just give you a little bit of an epilogue of this lecture. Diba, epilogue, ibig sabihin yan, mga sidetrack comments, no? Before a book ends. Pero this time, before my lecture ends, okay? Now, I just want to share with you my idea about the Bible. Because as you already know, no, if you have been watching my past videos, I am coming from a certain perspective as a psychologist. I would say I am a spiritual psychologist. I don't believe in materialism. I believe there is a spiritual realm other than the material world. I believe in the words of the Bible. That's where I come from, right? Now, in connection to the Bible and positive psychology, realize this, that the Bible, also known as God's Word, contains positive psychology principles. I have been reading the Bible for so long, and then I have been studying positive psychology also for so long, bigla akong may nare-realize the more I compare and contrast positive psychology and God's Word. And you know what's that? There are a lot of overlaps. God's Word contains positive psychology principles. In fact, I would say, going back to that slide I showed you a while ago, lahat yan as in lahat yan. 14 out of 14. The Bible has something to say about this. And in fact, I would be saying this, and you might be surprised, a lot of the things that the Bible teaches about this, later on, remember, the Bible was written first before positive psychology, di ba? As in, ang daming years ang pagitan yan, no? So, when you compare what the Bible teaches about these psychological concepts with scientific positive psychology, oh my goodness, over and over again, the Bible is confirmed by scientific positive psychology. And as we go along this series of lectures, once in a while, I'm going to show that that's true. Na maraming tinuro ang Biblia, God's Word, that are very consistent in line with modern-day scientific positive psychology research. And so given this, let me give you two applications. But take note, these applications, hindi ko to pinipilit sa inyo, no? This is optional applications. Depends on you if you want to do it or not. But think about it. Consider doing this. Number one, you really need to change the way you see God's Word. Why am I saying this? Because many people, especially young people like you tend to see the Bible in a very narrow way. Marami mga tao masyadong makitid ang understanding about God's Word, no? Ang Bible, killjoy. Ang Bible, judgmental. Puro lang yan about heaven, hell, morality. And I don't even want to talk about those things. Therefore, I don't read the Bible. Go beyond that. Go beyond that. Believe it or not, one of the reasons why the Bible was written, other than, of course, to get us closer to God so that we can be right in our spiritual lives, other than that, because God cares for our mental health. Yes, after all, God created the psyche. I mentioned that in one of my videos. How the psyche is created, the origin of the psyche. God is the ultimate psychologist. Siya yung may gawa niyan. Therefore, He gives us instructions how to take good care of that psyche that we have. So what does He do? He reveals those techniques, how to take care of your psyche within the pages of the Bible. And a lot of those things are using positive psychology principles. In fact, I would go as far as saying as the Bible is very close to the standard of a positive psychology textbook. Scientific positive psychology. Again, sinasabi ko, ang daming overlaps dyan. Tinuro ng Bible na gawin mo na maganda raw mangyayari pag ginawa mo, and later on, positive psychology confirms na oo nga, no, maganda nga talaga pag ginagawa mo. Yun lang yung wala sa Bible. Most of the time, the Bible teaches you to do this and do that, positive psychology principle, but it does not explain why it works. Basta sinasabi lang sa Bible, do this and do that. Diba? Yun na yung role ng science. Yun na ngayon yung role ng scientific positive psychology. Now, we understand why different principles in the Bible works when it comes to our mental health, when it comes to our happiness. Diba? Kasi you have to understand, no, na yung Biblia at yung psychology, scientific psychology, they are using different method to generate the truth. Positive psychology uses the scientific method. The Bible uses divine revelation. But I don't see a problem with that. Because the human mind is so complex that you cannot just understand it using numerical data. Like what the behaviorist would preach you to do. Di ba ganyan yung mga hardcore behaviorist? If I don't see it in the data, it's not true. Hindi dapat ganun. After all, remember, I mentioned this in one of my videos, the psyche, which we study in psychology, is not a material thing. And anything that is not material, it's so hard to measure. Pinag-aaralan natin dito yung spirito, the psyche. Oh. Can you fully quantify the psyche? Really? How can you quantify something that is not physical in nature? Mahirap. Marami kang mamimiss out kung nakafocus ka lang sa numerical data. So you also have to consider divine data and combine that with the numerical data. Hindi ko sinasabing huwag na tayong mag-statistics. Hindi ko sinasabing huwag na tayong mag-scientific method. But to focus just on the scientific method in understanding the mind does not make sense. Kasi yung pinag-aaralan natin dito is something non-physical in the first place. Tandaan nyo, ang scientific method, ginawa yan under the physical sciences. It is meant to be used for physical things, understanding rocks, understanding gravity, understanding atoms, molecules. Pero psyche, spirito ng tao, hindi pwedeng scientific method lang. You have to be open to other source of knowledge, especially divine wisdom, divine revelation. After all, our psyche is divine in nature, created by the divine being. Alright? And number 2 application, medyo napahaba ako dun sa number 1. In connection to my number 1 application, again, change the way you see the Bible. Number 2 application is, now that you have a new perspective of God's Word, maybe you can read the Bible to help you make your psyche better. Again, I keep on mentioning this over and over again. A lot of the things being taught in God's Word is in line, consistent with scientific data in the field of positive psychology. So give it a chance. Huwag nyo naman kaagad isara yung mga mata nyo, yung mga puso nyo from God's Word. After all, He's the ultimate psychologist. Lahat ng magagaling na psychologist na kilala nyo, ginawa lang ng Diyos yan. Siya talaga ang pinakamagaling sa psychology. Wouldn't you want to learn from the ultimate psychology himself? Kaya ako, mas idol ko ang Diyos kaysa kay Freud. Especially in the field of positive psychology. Mas idol ko ang Diyos kaysa kay Martin Seligman. Because Martin Seligman is just confirming the many things that God has already established about our minds. Again, optional naman to. I am not forcing this to you. It's up to you if you want to do application number 1 or application number 2. Okay? I am not here to debate. Oo. Kung ayaw nyo, edi wag. Alright? Anyway, so that ends our short lecture for today about what this field is all about. I hope it excited you. I hope it inspired or it sparked your interest to study positive psychology. Okay, until next time, Sir Howard here. I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye, God bless.